Hello. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I can't see most of you, so hi and welcome. Thank you for coming on this Saturday evening. I hope most of you did the tour of the Heat Experience Center inside and you have left your feedback and review and your sharing and experience there as well. I'm Sapna. Uh, my colleagues are missing here right now, but we are a team called KYC of Socratus Foundation. KYC stands for Know Your City. These experience centers that you see have been set up by Socrates Foundation and Livable Accelerator. Both these organizations are trying to bring sustainable practices closer to people. And doing this Know Your City initiative is one of the ways to do it. Under the KYC initiative, we have set up around 6 experience centers so far, and each of them work on different theme, and we have worked with different domain partners. As you see here, we have Heat and Rivers of Bengaluru Experience Center at NGMA. We have one on called the Loom, which is on textile, which is in Miraya Greens off Banarghata Road. There is one on art and craft, focusing on Channapatna craft, which is in Circular Square off Kanakpura Road. One on zero waste, which is in JP Nagar with the community there. And we have one on everyday materials, which is in Bangalore Creative Circus in Yashwantpur. As you see, these experience centers are spread out throughout the city. And we are working on one on food, which will come out in Kengeri with QLO, Quest Learning Observatory. There's another one on sustainable construction materials, which will come out in RV College, which will be set up in RV College of Architecture. The one on ancient Bengaluru will come here at NGMA again. One thing that we do differently with these experience centers is that we rotate them periodically because we believe that these experience centers should be taken closer to the neighborhoods so that it becomes more accessible to the citizens. Because the idea is the more people see, feel, and touch, the more inclined they are to act. And that is the premise of setting up these experience centers. We are very thankful to all our domain partners with whose support we have set up this experience center. We are deeply grateful to NGMA for hosting our heat as well as the Rivers of Bengaluru Experience Center here under their Indian Museums Against Climate Change initiative. The Indian Museum Climate Change Initiative has about 15 museums in their partnership, and NGMA happens to be one of them. And last but not the least, we are very grateful to Supriya and Bhargavi for having tirelessly collated this content for the Heat Experience Center, which you just saw there. And they have helped us organize this event as well. So I will now invite Supriya to start the event today. Thank you so much.
I will speak a lot later. So right now we'll just start the screening. The video is already playing, but we'll start the movie screening and we'll talk more about the film and the filmmakers who are here all the way from Delhi after the screening. Yes.
सुबह मुझे 5 साढ़े 5 बजे उठना है क्योंकि 7 बजे निकलते हैं बच्चे, तो इनका लंच बनाना, फिर हस्बैंड का खाना बनाना, फिर सबके लिए अलग बनाना, तो टाइम लग जाता है। 4-5 घंटे की नींद मिल रही है रात में, और दिन में 1 आध घंटे थोड़ा सा ले लेती हूँ झपकी, बस और नहीं मिलती। हस्बैंड आते हैं तो फिर फ़ोन कर देते हैं कि हाँ मैं इधर आ गया हूँ, फिर मैं रोटी बना लेती हूँ, बाकी खाना बना रहता है, बर्तन धोना, साफ़ सफाई करके सो जाते हैं। थकान सी लगती है। जैसे आँख वाँख लगती है तो बच्चे दोनों लड़ाई करने लग जाते हैं, तो इनको समझाना डांटना सब, फिर ट्यूशन का काम करवाना, ये सब लगा ही रहता है कुछ ना कुछ, मतलब उसी में एडजस्ट करती रहती हूँ। पानी देखो लड़ रहे हैं दोनों अंदर देखो हो रही है अब जाऊंगी इनको डांटूंगी।
हम महिलाएं घर पे रहती है और महिलाओं का ज्यादातर टाइम ज्यादा किचन में ही जाता है, तो वो किचन में ज्यादा काम करती है और गैस वगैरह वो सब उसका जो और हीट हो जाता है। पहला हमारा छोटा था और ऊपर कौले थे जो मिट्टी के आते हैं ना, मैंगलोर टाइप वैसा। उस टाइम एग्जॉस्ट नहीं था घर में, एक ढापे के जैसा जो वो एक कौला रहता था, वो ऐसा अपने किचन की गैस की जो शेगड़ी है तो है ना रहते हैं ना उसके ऊपर ही लगाते थे। एक कांच वाला रहता था, उसे सूर्य प्रकाश अंदर आना चाहिए, और एक ऐसा होल वाला रहता था ताकि किचन में जितना भी वाफ तैयार होता है, गैस तैयार होता है, वो कोयले की वजह से वो बाहर जाने का।
काम करते दोपहरी में मतलब इतनी गर्मी हो जाती है, अगर हम गैस जला दे तो और ज़्यादा गर्म हो जाता है घर हमारे। हाँ, क्योंकि अंदर ही खाना बनता है सारा। फिर ये फैन है तो गैस जलती है, फैन बंद कर देते हैं। अगर रोटी सेकनी होती है तो बंद करना होता है।
भगवान ने पेट दिया है तो खाना तो पड़ता है खाना पकाते टाइम बच्चे भी परेशान करते हैं ना, तो उन पे ही गुस्सा निकल जाता है। बारिश आने वाली होती है ना तब बहुत गर्मी
बहुत गर्मी लगती है। घुटन सी घुटन, पंखे की हवा भी
नींद
असर
भी
नहीं
नहीं
करती,
आती है
कूलर
रात
की
को,
हवा असर नहीं करती, फिर बैठे बैठे टीवी
सो
देखते
जाते हैं टीवी देखते हैं सुबह सुबह उठो ना तो अच्छा भी नहीं लगता है फिर।
पूरी नींद नहीं होती ना तो अच्छा नहीं लगता है,
जैसे
सुस्ती सी
पूरा
लग
बदन
जाती है।
दर्द करने लगता है, पूरी नींद नहीं होती है ना, तो ऐसे होता है।
मुझे हेल्थ इशू पहले से थोड़ा था, लेकिन गर्मी के कारण ज़्यादा हो जाता है। जैसे जब मैं खाना वगैरह बनाती हूँ ना गैस के आगे, तो चक्कर आता है मेरे को बहुत ज़्यादा, और उसकी वजह से मेरे बीपी हाई हो जाता है गर्मी से। उल्टी जैसा मन करता है, जैसे कभी उल्टी भी हो जाती है, उल्टी जैसा मन भी करता है।
एक बार तो ऐसा हुआ था, 5 बजे का टाइम घर से जा रहा था, सच की अजान हुई थी, तो प्रे करने के लिए हम वजू करते हैं ना, मैं वो करती एकदम सडनली ऐसा लगा नाक में से खून निकला, तब मुझे पता लगा कि गर्मी इतनी है।
हमारा घर ऐसा पहाड़ों पे है, धूम आती घरों पे रहते रात, हम लोग भी ऐसी गर्मी से वो होते रहते, बेचैन बेचैन रहते।
गुड आफ्टरनून। हम लोगों को बहुत गर्मी हो रहा, दीवार में से गर्मी आ रहा, बैठने भी नहीं हो रहा, थोड़ा भी हवा नहीं आ रहा।
मम्मी को अब ब्रैकेट्स वगैरह होता है, मम्मी को भी आग के नीचे ऐसा स्टार्ट हुआ है पिछले 1 साल से, लेकिन ठीक ही नहीं हुआ है, तो गर्मी इतनी कि हल्का सा अगर पसीना यहाँ पे हो गया ना तो वो वापस आ जाता है। गर्मी आते ही हमको मौसम पता चलता है कि पैरों से पैर सूज गया, मतलब गर्मी आ गई है, बहुत ठंडी गर्मी पड़ रही है, और ऐसे अचानक से कुछ नहीं होता, मम्मी काम कर रही है तो कुछ हो, और ना ऐसे स्ट्रेंथ की बना के रखी है कि आप हॉस्पिटल तक चल के जाना है तो हम लोग को बोलते कि मैं जा रही हूँ, सच छोड़ के तुम लोग आना, तो पता चल जाता है कि बिकॉज ऑफ गर्मी इनका ब्लड प्रेशर हाई हो जाएगा या लो हो जाएगा, ऐसे प्रॉब्लम्स आते हैं।
तहान लागते, परत इचिंग होतं, कधी कधी गर्मीमध्ये पुरळ येतात, आणि मग असं वाटतं की नको तिथे, कि रात में कोई ज़्यादा करके खिड़की ओपन नहीं करते। एक तो चोरों की बहुत मारा हमारे यहाँ पे, चोर कभी कहाँ से घुस जाएंगे ना पता नहीं चलता है, तो जो भी है वो विंडो बंद करते हैं, एडजस्ट फैन के सहारे चला लेते हैं।
डॉक्टर के पास कभी ऐसा, या गर्मी के वास्ते नहीं, कभी पूरा सर्दी बिर्दी कुछ होएगा, खांसी कभी
कोई अस्पताल नहीं, सिर्फ डिस्पेंसरी मोहल्ला क्लिनिक है, वो भी नाम के ही रह रहे हैं, डिस्पेंसरी अभी नाम की है, बिल्कुल कोई सुनाई नहीं होती गरीब आदमियों की। ये जैसे कोई प्राइवेट छोटे मोटे डॉक्टर है उसी के पास जाते हैं।
यहाँ पे हम लोगों ने ईट वे के लिए एक रैली भी निकाली थी, हम लोगों ने चार्ट बना के चार्ट भी लगाए थे। ऐसी जगह हम लगाते हैं जहाँ पर बहनों की नज़र ज़्यादा पड़े। फिर हमने अपने पूरे ब्लॉक में एक रैली भी निकाली थी, बहनों को हमने समझाया था इस बारे में भी।
गर्मी के तापमान के बारे में चार्ट पेपर बनाए थे हम बहनों ने मिलके, लोगों को जागरूक करने के लिए कि आज की गर्मी का तापमान इतना है, अधिकतम इतना, न्यूनतम इतना है। ज़्यादा गर्मी होने की वजह से आप थोड़ा सावधान रहिए, बाहर निकलने से पहले सर को ढक के रखिए, मुंह को बांध को रखना, फुल बाजू के कपड़े पहन लेना, मतलब यही सारी चीज़ें जानकारी देते हैं।
सरकार जब वोट लेने होते हैं ना तब आ जाते हैं, सब बोलते हैं, पर वोट लेके फिर कुछ करते ही नहीं।
पानी की सप्लाई आती है सुबह 10 बजे से और शाम को 3-4 बजे तक रहती है। हमें तो भर के रखना होता है, तो कभी जैसे नहाना धोना ज़्यादा हो जाता है तो पानी ख़त्म भी हो जाता है। रात को तो जब नींद नहीं आती ना गर्मी की वजह से, मैं तो जाती हूँ बार बार मुंह हाथ धोती रहती हूँ, तो बस बार बार अपने कपड़े इतने इतने गीले कर लूँगी। और उससे दिक्कत भी होती है, खैर बार बार कपड़े गीले करने से ना खारिश सी हो जाती है। दही वगैरह खा लेते हैं या नींबू पानी बना बना के पी लेते हैं।
जैसे ज़्यादा गर्मी पड़ती है जून जुलाई में, तो जैसे मतलब फ्रीज ही ठंडा होता है, कूलिंग होती है उसमें, तो जैसे कोई सामान निकालने जाती हूँ ना तो ऐसे दिल करता है बस बैठ ही रहूँ और उसको खोल के और मैं बैठ जाती हूँ। हस्बैंड भी डांटते हैं, कहते हैं इतनी देर खोल के इसमें बैठेगी तो उसकी कूलिंग ख़त्म हो जाएगी, फिर उसमें जो सामान रखा है वो ख़राब हो जाएगा। बहुत अच्छा लगता है उसके पास बैठना। बड़ा फ्रिज होता तो बैठ जाती हूँ।
मेरी मम्मी तो मार्केट में नाइटी में चली जाती है दुपट्टा लेके।
ऐसा नहीं, साड़ी में ही
साड़ी
रहते
में
हैं।
ही रहना पड़ता है। हाँ, साड़ी में ही रहते हैं, पूरा दिन साड़ी में। हमारे यहाँ घूंघट निकालते हैं ना, इसीलिए। और ऐसे सूट वगैरह भी नहीं पहनते हम, तो गर्मी तो ये घर में ही सहन करनी पड़ती है हमें।
गर्मी में लड़की जैसा बाल हो जाना चाहिए। हाँ, वैसे लड़के लोग का है ना, वैसे भी वो साबुन लगा के नहाओ, नंगा करके वो बाल नहीं जाते।
लेकिन सुंदरता चली जाएगी ना।
वो तो देखो गर्मी से बचने के लिए सुंदर नहीं बनना।
मेरे पापा को मैंने देखी हूँ, हम लोग छोटे छोटे थे, गर्मी बहुत होती थी, तो एक ऐसा पानी जाने का रास्ता होता है दरवाजे पे तो, और ऐसे ऊंची दहलीज बनी हुई रहती है, तो उसको पैक कर देते थे। अच्छा, जमीन को क्लीन करके उसको पैक करके और पूरी जमीन में पानी भर के उसको देते थे, स्विमिंग पूल। और वो साथ में हम लोग भी मजा करते थे।
हमारा जो पहले का घर था ना, तो वो 2008 तक, उसके पहले हमारे सास ससुर सब रहते थे, तो पूरा वो काय बोलणार त्याला, कौलाचं घर, कौलारू घर होतं. आणि फर्स्ट फ्लोर हा वुडन होता. म्हणजे फ्लोअर मीन्स आता कसा हे अँगल वगैरे माळा हा फक्त लाकडी माळा होता. तर आम्ही जवळजवळ 6-7 वर्ष आम्ही त्या घरामध्ये आम्ही हे केलं, संसार केला, पण तेव्हा असं हीट नाही, कारण ॲडजस्ट फॅन नव्हता आणि वरून विंडो वगैरे काहीच नव्हतं. म्हणजे होते पण नसल्याच जमा, कारण त्या पलीकडे आम्हाला घर आहेत, तर व्हेंटिलेशनची एवढी गरज नव्हती, कारण वरती कौलारू होतं आणि ओपन होतं, वरती ओपन होतं, त्यामुळे ती गरमी जाणवत नव्हती. प्लस आता जाणवते जेव्हा घर बांधलं ना सिमेंट कॉन्क्रीटचं, तर आतमध्ये आम्हाला भरपूर गरमी जाणवते, कारण आमच्या चारी बाजूला सगळीकडे घरं आली आहेत. व्हेंटिलेशनच्या नावाखाली फक्त खिडक्या आहेत, त्या खिडकीतून काय हवा पास होत नाही.
पॉपुलेशन ही इतना है धारावी में, गर्दी गर्दी गर्दी, नजदीक सब। ये दीवार तोड़ेंगे तो इसके बाजू में घर है, हम लोग बीच में की खिड़की नहीं निकाल सकते, इसकी वजह से वो और सफोकेशन होता है। कंस्ट्रक्शन बढ़ने की वजह से तीनों बाजू मेरा पैक हो गया।
In our area it feels like that only, like the heat is not passing over and the wind is not coming. After this construction it is very, like it's heating very much. We should not give the permission about the high buildings and all. If we keep it in limited, then the air will also pass, the heat will also not be in the same place, it will flow.
एटलीस्ट कम से कम पेड़ लगा दें घरों के आसपास में।
हम यही चाहते हैं कि हमारा मकान बन जाता तो बहुत अच्छा था। हम ऊपर वाले सोच रहे हैं किसी तरह इसको बना लें 1-2 साल में, तब हमारा दिक्कत ख़त्म हो जाएगी। 2 साल में सोच रहे हैं कि तैयार कर लेंगे,
पक्का घर करने
हाँ
के लिए।
टीन हटा के छत डाल देंगे, फिर ऊपर बना लेंगे, तो कोई आएगा जाएगा तो मेरा बेटा तो बोलता है मम्मी एसी लगाओ। काका कहाँ से लगाएं, आमदनी है नहीं इतनी और घर भी नहीं है, हम एसी भी नहीं लगा सकते।
एसी कैसे लगाए, सारी हवा
क्योंकि दीवार नहीं है, जैसे
चटाई के बने हैं ना,
कैसे
बेम्बू के। इसका भारी ये नहीं उठा पाएगी भारी होते हैं ना एसी।
कूलर तो पहले ही से था हमारे पास, लेकिन एसी के बिना हो नहीं पा रहा था, क्योंकि इतनी कूलिंग हो कर नहीं पाता। कूलर जो होता है थोड़ी देर के लिए राहत तो देता है, लेकिन उतनी राहत नहीं दे पाता। बरसात जब आती है तो उसके बाद तो फिर कूलर का कोई मायने नहीं रह जाता, क्योंकि फिर वो शरीर को इतना चिपचिपाता है ना, और इतनी उसमें स्मेल सी आने लग जाती है, जो उसकी घास वगैरह सड़ने लग जाती है तो उसमें स्मेल भी आती है, और उसमें मच्छर डेंगू पानी में भी हो जाते हैं, वो बीमारी का भी कारण बनता है। एसी से कोई बीमारी भी नहीं होती है। अब तो बहुत ज़्यादा घरों में एसी हो गए, कुछ तो गर्मी के कारण हुए, कुछ एक दूसरे को देख के भी इंसान लगा लेता है कि भाई चलो इसके घर में गए, हाँ बड़ी ठंडक थी इसके घर में, भाई तो मेरे घर में रहेगा तो मेरे को भी आराम रहेगा एसी लगाने से। आर्थिक नुकसान ये है कि बिजली का बिल ज़्यादा आता है। जून के महीने में तो हमने एक बार में हमने 2000 प्लस भी भरा, 2500 रुपये भी भरा हमने। जब एसी नहीं चलता है तो 500 400 इस तरह से आता है।
एसी भी लगाओ तो अंदर तो ठंडा करता है, बाहर गर्मी फेंकता है, तो बाहर वालों को तो दिक्कत होती है एसी से। सीधा आएगा वो गर्मी, तो ज़्यादा गर्मी होगी हमें ना, तो वो भी एक हिसाब से अच्छा भी नहीं है वो।
उसके सामने जो घर है उसे लगेगा कि भाई मेरे घर में सारी हीट आ रही है, तो कहीं ना कहीं उसकी जो मेंटेलिटी होगी फ्रेंडली वाली वो खत्म होती चली जाएगी। वो इनेमी के पॉइंट ऑफ से कंसीडर करेगा कि इसकी वजह से मैं सफ़र कर रहा हूँ। उसने कुछ नहीं किया, बट उसके एसी चलने की वजह से उसके घर में टोटली हीट जा रही, क्योंकि मोस्टली जो यहाँ के घर हैं वो ओपन है। ओपन का मतलब आउटसाइड जो फ्रंट है वो इस तरह का है कि कोई भी चीज़ हवा चलेगी तो प्रॉपर उधर जाएगी, तो जितनी भी हीट है आपकी वो उसके घर में जा रही है, ना चाहते भी उससे वो बच नहीं पा रहा। तो ये कहीं ना कहीं एक कॉज बन रहा है आपस में पड़ोसियों में डिस्टेंस का।
पहले लोग पानी में सड़क पे पानी डालते थे, साफ सफाई करके बाहर बैठ जाते थे, सुबह भी डालते थे शाम को भी डालते थे, मगर अब तो कोई है ही नहीं बिल्कुल ये चीज, बाहर बैठना बिल्कुल ही बंद हो गया है।
ये ऊपर ना वो पेंट कर रखे हैं वाइट वाला, जिससे थोड़ी सी राहत मिलती है। पहली बार जब पेंट हुआ था ना, मशीन ला के रखे थे टेम्परेचर वाली, अंदर रखी थी, हफ्ते में आके वो चेक करके जाते थे कि कितना टेम्परेचर कम हुआ इस पेंट से, तो हुआ है।
देखो हम लोग कूल पेंट डलाए थे बिल्डिंग के ऊपर, मगर यहाँ कूल पेंट पूरा निकल गया। हम लोग कूल पेंट डाले तो नेक्स्ट डे बारिश पड़ गया। बारिश पड़ा तो पूरा कूल पेंट निकल के देखो पाउडर बन गया, कूल पेंट का पाउडर।
हमने साड़ियाँ घर 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 से इकट्ठे की थी, और उसको काट काट के हमने वो छाँव वाला बनाया था। छाँव में वो अच्छा लगता था, वहाँ पे खड़े हो जाओ बातचीत कर लो तो ठंडक रहता है उसमें। पर वो जैसे ऑटो वोटो चलाने वाले आते थे ना, उन्होंने तोड़ दिया। बाहर गाड़ी वाड़ी चलती है ना, नहीं तो अच्छा था वो, हमने सबने मिलके बनाया था।
हस्बैंड को खाली कॉफी बना सकते हैं वो, बस बाकी कुछ नहीं बना सकते। हाँ, अंडा फ्राई कर सकते हैं, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, लेकिन ऐसा बोल नहीं सकते ना कि सब चपाती भाकरी कर कर करके दो, नहीं ना, ऐसा भी है ना, हम लोग को खुद करना है।
फिर हम खुद ही बाहर भगा भगा के मारेंगे हमारे को भी हस्बैंड हाउस बीवी रहते हो, घर में रहते हो, फिर भी हमारे को खाना तक भी नहीं दोगे तो फिर तुम क्या करोगे। तो जो महिला शक्ति के अंदर में जो होता है वो तो देखो, चाहे गर्मी हो चाहे सर्दी हो, वो काम तो करना ही पड़ेगा, चाहे खाना बनाना हो चाहे घर का काम होता है वो तो करना ही पड़ेगा।
और तो करना ही पड़ता है।
लेडीज एक ऐसी भट्टी है ना, वो हर भट्टी को बर्दाश्त कर रही है।
कैसे मिलेंगे घर के काम में पैसे? क्यों, ये भी तो काम है। काम तो है, पर हम कई बार नहीं करते, जैसे घर का ही काम करते हैं। मिल जाए तो अच्छा है, और ना मिले तो भी अच्छा है, घर का काम तो करना ही पड़ेगा जैसे भी है।
आदमी लोग जाते हैं तो कमा के औरत को परिवार को ही देते हैं, वो तो अपने घर ही आया पैसा। नहीं तो वो तो हिसाब से देते हैं ना। नहीं, कोई कोई दे देते हैं, कोई पूरे हाथ में दे देते हैं। आदमी थोड़ा बिना सोचे जो फालतू भी चीज लाके रखते हैं। औरत क्या है,
अच्छा नहीं है। वो ज्यादा तो अच्छा है कि आपके हाथ में ही आदमी पैसा, वो ज्यादा पैसा काम भी होगा तो बचेगा।
अपने लिए क्या करते हैं, हम कुछ नहीं कर पाते अपने लिए, तो बस बच्चों के बारे में ही सोचना रहता है। बाकी हस्बैंड के बारे में सोचो, बच्चों के बारे में, अपना उसी में अपना भी चल जाता है। बच्चे जो कहें उनके लिए वो बना के दो, अपना तो बस ठीक है वही हम भी खा लेंगे।
Hello. I would now like to invite the filmmakers and the researchers behind this project. We have Sonali with us, who leads the communication at Sustainable Futures Collaborative. She has worked in policy development communication with a focus on climate and environmental issues. We have Pritish with us, who's a visual artist working across drawings, sculptures, and lens-based media. He's a graduate of the Faculty of Fine Arts, MSU Baroda. Also, I'm from Baroda. His practice engages personal and collective memory through recontextualized images, text, and sound, exploring how identity is shaped by intimacy, labor, and everyday gestures. Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, do not. All right. I'll just. Am I audible? Okay. I'll just begin with giving a little context about how we came about this work. The video will keep playing in the background because it's supposed to be played in a loop, and the audio is also supposed to be played in loop. Okay, so this project kind of came about last year when Godrej Design Labs reached out to us and they asked us to kind of design an exhibit for Conscious Collective, which is an event that happens every year that they do in Bombay around climate. They have exhibits, they have workshops, and they have talks by various experts. So, since SFC has already been working on heat policy for quite some time, and I personally, in my visual arts practice, have been working with the idea of unpaid care work. I did a project 2 years ago with Serendipity Arts Foundation where we kind of designed a website to help sensitize people about the unpaid care work that women do throughout the day, every day. So, since both of us had these interests, we thought, okay, why not combine both of these into something for this exhibit? And that's kind of how we narrowed it down to this concern, which is that the impact of heat on homemakers who perform care work every day. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about why we use thermal imagery and how we thought it made sense. The first thing is very obvious because the project is called Making the Invisible Visible. So the core idea was that we wanted to take this abstract idea of heat and kind of make that into some visible, visceral format so that, usually when you talk about heat, it's in some like abstract terms, you can't really see it. How does it affect you? And also, we thought, okay, let's try visualizing this invisible heat. So that's how the thermal imagery came about. Another important reason why we thought of using thermal imagery was because when we were experimenting with thermal images and videos, we realized that it was forming like this very nice balance between abstraction and representation. And so all these thermal videos that you see are essentially taken from low income households across Delhi and Bombay. So we went to different areas in Delhi and we went to Dharavi and Jogeshwari. And we collected different videos of women performing daily chores in their house using a thermal camera, and then we kind of stitched it into a loop. So what you see here is essentially, it was initially designed as a 40 feet by 10 feet installation. So it was much longer than this, and it was almost as high as this. And the idea was essentially to show different parts of the day. So if you see at the, if you look at this also, there's like vaguely it begins in the morning and then it goes to afternoon chores. There's washing clothes, and then there's doing some outdoor work, and then again cooking at night. So the loose idea is that it goes throughout the day and it goes in a loop, just how a lot of homemakers essentially spend the same day over and over again for years on end. So that was the idea behind using thermal imagery. uh, yeah, I think that's it about the project. I'll just give a little bit of context about the audio also. So we also um recorded all these audio clips from the same households that we went to, and then we kind of stitch them together into a narrative. Sonali will take over now and give you a little bit context about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Pratish, and thank you everybody for being here. I know I really appreciate you braving the mad Bangalore traffic today. Um, I just wanted to talk about the policy angle of this a little bit, and the fact that indoor heat is something many of you sitting here might know is not something that is often talked about in policy and public conversations, right? Our heat action plans, which are India's primary policy response to heat waves, don't mention indoor heat at all. Whereas, as we all know, millions of women are constantly spending their time at home working through the day, right? So even when the government issues an advisory saying, "Do not go outside because it's too hot," for millions of women, the burden of the burden of the heat wave is not really outside; it's inside. So the central fact that this project tries to document is that care work is non-negotiable, even in extremely hot temperatures and even in homes that turn into literal ovens by the day and still don't cool down at night because of tin roofs, asbestos roofs, lack of ventilation. Most houses, as you also heard a woman talk about, the massive increase in construction in Dharavi, which leads to lack of any ventilation and any air going past. Care work is non-negotiable. As I said, meals must be cooked, children must be fed, clothes must be washed, regardless of temperature, regardless of what this costs to the body and the mind. As one woman put it very plainly but powerfully, कितनी भी गर्मी हो खाना तो बनाना पड़ेगा, कितनी भी गर्मी हो काम तो करना ही पड़ता है. To us, this is not resignation. It is the exact definition of a structural gendered trap. I also wanted to take a few minutes to kind of point out a few things that I particularly discovered and I think are the highlights of this whole work that we did. I mean, while we were on the field, we went around Delhi, low-income neighborhoods in Delhi, Mumbai, and spoke to some people in Hyderabad. We realized that heat is not experienced equally, even within a household, right? So as you heard in this, and as we all know, women often prioritize the comfort of other people before them, right? In fact, even when we went to houses that had ACs or coolers, we found out that women are using them very selectively because of concerns of high power costs, right? So, one woman in a resettlement colony in New Delhi spoke to us about how she only turns on the AC in the house when the men are home, when her children, her sons and her husband comes home after a long day of work. And whereas when she or her daughter-in-law are working through the day, the ACs are constantly off, right? So this is just to kind of highlight that AC ownership and cooler ownership and AC ownership might not always translate to protection from heat, because AC use is also very gendered, I assume. The other thing about, I think one of the women said here, that men often can step out in the evenings to escape the heat that is trapped inside, but women can't simply do that because um, lack of safety. There are safety concerns. They also have to kind of wrap up all the chores in the evening and so on. So I just wanted to highlight that when we think of heat exposure in the household, we cannot assume that everyone experiences the same conditions simply because they live in the under the same roof, right? The other thing I wanted to also kind of highlight was, and you might have noticed this, I found this really interesting, that there were conversations about how interpersonal relationships within a house and within a neighborhood are changing because of heat, right? So there's this one snippet where I think a woman talks about how she feels angry all the time because of the heat, because she can't sleep at night, she has to wake up early, feed her children, and so on. And then all that anger just comes out on the child, right? There is somebody in the audio clip who's talking about how, because some houses in a neighborhood, in a densely packed neighborhood, can afford to install ACs, and they have, which ultimately means that because the houses are so close, all the warm hot air that is blowing from their house is coming into, the other house is coming into their house, and that is actually causing some tensions within relationships in the neighborhood. um, third thing I wanted to also say is that we've also kind of, I think what we are seeing increasingly is that gender roles are shaping the burden of heat, right? So there is one woman who talks about clothing norms. You might have heard when this person is saying that, she has to be wearing like a dupatta and, be fully covered inside a house because that's just the societal expectation there is around dressing. And this limits her ability to adapt, right? There's another woman who talks about how she cooks wearing a salwar suit, and she can't really, I mean, again, societal expectations and gender norms around dressing. But what she does is she tries to just wet her clothes often, but that leads to her getting rashes, right? And then lastly, I think one important point that also kind of came about here is that kitchens are the spaces where we are spending the most amount of time in the house. But these are the spaces that are not designed keeping in mind women at all, right? If and especially the houses that we went to, the kitchens there were kind of used as a storeroom, right? Like all the unwanted stuff was dumped in there because it's a kitchen, a woman has to spend time in it. Lastly, I just wanted to say that I think one more important point here is around cooling solutions, right? So in the audio there's one bit where a woman from Hyderabad talks about how she had painted her house using cool paint. So cool paint, for those of you not who are not familiar, is this reflective white paint that research suggests is known to bring indoor temperatures down by I think 5 or 6 degrees at least. And this woman is like questioning the role of cool paint in her particular area because it rained the next day and all the cool paint kind of became a powder, right? There's another question that I posed to one woman in Delhi about, so she had got her roofs painted with this reflective paint a couple of years ago, and we asked her whether it made a difference, and she said, yeah, it made a difference. We saw like somebody had come home and they measured the difference in temperature, and we saw that it had reduced by 4 or 5 degrees. And then I asked her, did you see that? She's like, no, we were just told about it, right? So this kind of just made me question about like it kind of made me wonder whether a lot of our narratives assume this like linear path where it's like awareness is leading to action, whereas what we are actually seeing on the ground is that there is a layer of lived experience here that we might be missing out on, right? So I think like as practitioners, students, architects, I don't know, researchers, communicators, journalists, we might need to ask very clearly whether the solution that we're even proposing work for these women, right? We need to go talk to them, we need to ask them whether the solution works for them, whether they can see it, whether they have the agency around the solution, and will this particular solution last, right? I'd just like to close with that, but yeah, would love for you to, if anybody is interested in asking questions, offering suggestions, if any, pointing out if anything stood out for them, maybe we could do that. I can't really see anybody from your group.
So Ashfaq has a mic. If anybody wants to ask a question or just has a comment, you can raise your hand so that Ashfaq can come to you.
Sure. Where's Pritesh?
Hi, thank you so much for the screening. I think what you guys did is extremely cool. My only question was this: so the blue and warm colors that are going in, um, at least I'm from Hyderabad, and when I actually enter my house as well, the indoors are a lot hotter than even the outdoors sometimes. And I would intuitively think that the air inside the house is more yellow than blue. So, did you have to actually, was this how the instrument was capturing heat indoors, or did you actually have to temper it down to show the contrast indoors?
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the things we discovered while using the thermal camera was that it is always showing relative information. It is not showing an absolute scale, which is why, and this was done at like the first iteration of this project where we were still kind of figuring out how to, stitch these things together, how to work with thermal imagery in a way that is not very scientific. So like we also removed a lot of the data markers from the videos, all the absolute markings of like, okay, this, because when in thermal camera, when you record it usually shows you like the highest and the lowest point within a frame. So we also removed a lot of that information consciously because we wanted to create this narrative, and we were working with this idea of relative heat. But for the, because this project is still ongoing and we want to do more iterations and we want to go back to the field and we want to record again, we are planning to use something called a radiometric video in thermal cameras, which is essentially it can give you absolute temperature data of every pixel at every point of time. So if we do that, when, or rather when we do that and go back and record radiometric video, I think that is when you can go back and tamper the scale and change it in post rather than recording it in a certain way. But since we had this in mind that okay, we'll have to stitch these together horizontally because we had a vague idea of how we'd bring these together, so that's why we did it uh, in the recording itself and not like we didn't record absolute markings every time. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you so much for thank you so much for the presentation that you have provided, especially the movie. I have one comment and one question. The comment being that, as you have pointed it out, heat action plans and all these heat notifications, they come during the season and then they go away. Unfortunately, the biggest error that I am noticing in governance is that it's treated more of from a disaster management framework and not being looked at from an urban governance issue. I think all these questions of the places where they were saying that if I want to break a wall, I'm going to be breaking the wall of the other person too. It clearly shows how setback spaces are being encroached upon, and now I cannot make any changes on that. That's my comment, being that let's start looking at urban heat stress as a urban governance issue and not as a disaster, just a one-time seasonal disaster issue. My question being, in the course of your interviews conducted, you have asked a lot of questions to the ladies. May I know what was the view of the gentlemen of the house? That'll be my question to you. Thank you.
Thanks. That's actually a really powerful comment, and this is something we've been also talking about at the Sustainable Futures Collaborative and our research on heat. Is that, I mean, as many of you might know, heat waves right now are not considered as a disaster, right? As a national disaster, and there have been efforts and advocacy around that to push for it. And I think with that, a lot of these challenges might finally get addressed. So your question about whether what the women, what the men thought, right? So interestingly, like I think there were a couple of men who were also talking about how, like, there's this one woman who's talking about how she can't like remove her clothes because there are like gender norms in the house, and her husband also like, yeah, that is sad, and but we can't really do anything about it. We did not end up talking to a lot of men, because we mostly went around the times when women are at home. Um, I think there were some conversations in Bombay with the men, and I remember one of them very clearly talking about the built environment and how that affects his wife. So there's one woman called Nazneen Sheikh who lives in Jogeshwari East, and it's a very dense settlement colony. Her house is built of tin roofs, and I posed this question about when they want to, if they have the means to construct a concrete, a pakka house or a different house somewhere. And he kind of was very sympathetic. He's aware of the problems that come with tin roofs, and but there's only so much he can do. I had a very interesting conversation with a man in Dharavi who works as an electrician at some MNC, lives in a chawl in Dharavi with his newly wed wife. He was very bothered by the lack of ventilation in those houses, and his, like, because there are no exhaust fans in that particular building, right? Even walking up to his floor, which is his house, which was on the third floor, was like this dingy walk with barely any sunlight, barely any air. And he had a very interesting solution about community and like that building ventilation, some sort of a community ventilation in that building where im- you sort of put a vent in one house, and that kind of goes through all the other houses and takes out all the all the hot air from there. He had a whole plan laid out, but I think again the problem with that was a lot of people who live in Dharavi live on rent and they can't make structural adjustments to those houses. So I mean, those were some conversations I had with the men. And I think because they also go out and work in hot temperatures, they're also very sensitive about it. But at the same time, like, I do know that some women were very clearly saying, oh, if we don't cook, our men are going to, like, our husbands are going to throw us out and they'll question what you're even doing, through the day. So it was a bit of a mix, as you would expect it. Anybody else?
Hi. Hi. Thank you for this. This was so sensitively done, and there was so much dignity in it, especially with the artistic choices that you made. There was a sense of intimacy in the imagery, but still, and the voices, of course, and yet, because we don't see actual photographs and videos of people's homes, there's information and it's abstracted just sufficiently enough. So I thought, like, artistically, like, it was a very intelligent piece of work, uh, especially in sort of creating the conversation towards what you wanted to do. So congratulations on that. I had two questions. Firstly, maybe on the research one, particularly as you were saying, Sonali, uh, there is sometimes heat is part of our discourse, right, in the everyday. It especially shows up in the summer, just before summer. We talk about heat in a particular kind of way, and I'm curious about when these interviews happened and whether you suspect if you conducted them in January versus in June, what would change? Because there is a memory of heat and there is the experience of it. And I'm curious about how your research tool kind of responds to that. My second curiosity was about um, if you also because a lot of policy speaks to heat adaptation, right? And we know of architectural sort of intervention, but also softer policy interventions, etc. Is there DIY heat adaptation that you saw in not just the questions in the story, but also in observation that stuck with you and that you thought might be useful to share with me? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your comments and the questions. Sorry, what was the
Memory of heat versus
right,
question
memory of
was
heat
about the
while
memory and the
recording
experience
in, right.
January to June.
So that's a great question. So what happened was the exhibit that we were showing. So this was made, as Pritish kind of mentioned earlier. We were showing this at the Godrej Conscious Collective event, which happens in December in Bombay. So we had about 3 or 4 months to actually do the interviews, and that was the period between September to October, maybe a little bit of November, but I don't think so. September, October. So we went to Bombay, and when we went to Bombay and Delhi, the experiences were a little different, right? Like Bombay was in fact still seeing really high temperatures and erratic rainfall at the same time. What we did in Bombay actually was we worked with this organization called Nazariya Arts Collective, that work in they work in Jogeshwari East, and we did like a bit of a group discussion around heat in general with the women that we were speaking to before asking them all of these questions, right? So we introduced to them a little bit about climate change, about like the whole heat map, about what's happening, and they were very aware of all of this, right? They were able to place that this rainfall that's happening in September and October is because of climate change. And I think Bombay in general is humid throughout, right? There is no respite from the humidity, and that hits very differently, especially when you're standing in a kitchen and you don't have a fan with you, right? Like your sweat is just not going to evaporate. The heat stress levels are going to be different. So I think in Bombay, I feel like whenever you go talk to women, especially, I feel like you might get very similar kind of answers. In Delhi, I felt like um, if we had gone there in peak June, like peak summer heat in May and June, maybe there would be a lot more evocative stories and lot more anecdotes about how they experience heat. But I also feel like, and I might be wrong, I feel like because every year it's just increasing for the women who are feeling it so acutely. I don't think that there is any, like, we never had to go and tell them that it is hot, right? Everybody experiences it firsthand. So I feel like that is somewhere in their collective memory and shared experiences, and that was coming out when we were talking to them and they were talking to each other. um, that's the first answer. What was the second question? Okay, we have a minute for the
Yeah,
second
the second question
question.
was DIY heat
Yeah.
adaptation
Oh,
that you
yeah.
saw.
Okay. I'll just give you my most favorite one, which is in the audio. There's a woman in Delhi talking about how when she feels too hot, she opens up the fridge and sits in front of it. And she's like, my husband scolds me for like wasting cooling khatam ho jayegi, electricity bill zyada aega. And then she like laughs it off and she says, oh, but if I had a bigger fridge, I'd probably sit inside it, right? So that was my favorite, but I have some more that I can talk to you about later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, but we are running really short on time. The filmmakers and researchers are here. Thank you so much, Pritish and Sonali, again for coming all the way from Delhi and for making this project. When I first saw this film, I was really taken aback, and I was like, I have to screen it and keep it at the experience center as well. Um, Now I have Vaibhavi with us from HeatWatch Foundation. In the Experience Center walkthrough earlier, we were also discussing about how domestic workers in Bangalore are experiencing heat, and in the larger context of like temperatures rising in Bangalore, one of the groups that is domestic workers is one of the most vulnerable also, and their work involves long daily commute, physically demanding tasks, poorly ventilated indoor environments, often without access to basic protection such as rest breaks, drinking water, and toilet facilities. So HeatWatch Foundation team and Vaibhavi, who's led this research, they recently launched a report on domestic workers in Bangalore. So we are also trying to contextualize the issue of heat in Bangalore and how different groups are experiencing it. I would like to call Vaibhavi on stage. She's a lawyer by training, presently researching on how heat stress affects domestic workers, bringing together climate justice, labor rights, and public health perspectives to support evidence-based interventions and policy conversations. Thank you so much, Vaibhavi, for coming here. Yes. Yeah, the presentation is here on this laptop. You just have to ask them. It's no, I thought I'd be there. So.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And before I begin, I just wanted to inform that in the invite we had mentioned Geeta Menon will be joining us, who is also a domestic workers' rights union activist. She's also the leader of the union. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us because of a personal loss. But yeah, I think I can answer the questions when you guys post them. So To talk about this project, I mean, I firstly want to thank Sonali and Pritish and the entire SFC team for their presentation. It was so beautiful, and it was so beautifully laid that I do not have to explain so much about how indoor heat affects women anymore. So, and to go forward, we saw about how unpaid work and women inside low income settlements experience heat and how it shapes their lives. But through this project, we'll be seeing about how paid domestic workers and how their working conditions and how they experience heat and how that affects their lives. Yeah, so to begin with, I am from HeatWatch Foundation, and we look at heat through the lens of labor rights. So we discuss briefly upon climate justice and labor rights and how it affects public health. We have conducted research on in multiple states across India on construction workers and ASHA workers, garment workers. Last year, we also had one on waste workers in Bangalore, and this year, this is an ongoing project on domestic workers. I would just like to correct what Supriya said. We haven't launched the report yet. It's still an ongoing process, but I would be happy to show you the findings that we have so far based on the research. Yeah, before that, I had this question. The reason why we started this on domestic workers, like why them? There's been a long pending acknowledgement for the kind of labor that domestic workers have been carrying on. And I mean, I'm happy that Karnataka has finally seen it and has proposed a draft bill on domestic workers, which is still to be passed. But there was a bill which was proposed in the cabinet last year, and the draft was available for public recommendations and reviews, and we're still waiting for the bill to be passed. So we thought, if not now, then when? So uh, this is one of the reasons why we started with domestic workers research this year. And to begin with, how we did this research is I interviewed around 40 women, 40 domestic workers within Bangalore. This is a very city-based research. And the tools that we used was to understand the access they have to first cope up with heat and how heat affects them. The first one would be around how heat affects them during their commute, that is how they're exposed to outdoor heat. And secondly, then we'll focus on indoor heat, and lastly, what effects that has, like on the economic burden part and on on their health. So to begin with, this is the basic findings of our research. So all of us go to work, and all these are common things that we have: access to sanitation and access to water or access to rest in between work. But these are some of the most basic protections that domestic workers lack. So based on the interview, we can see that 20 out of 40 domestic workers deliberately avoided drinking water so that they do not have to use restrooms. I've had many workers come and tell me that when I say lack of access to restroom, it just doesn't mean they cannot just use the restroom. It's lack of dignified access. Most of the times when they have restroom access, it's in the basement, or it doesn't have a gender-based restrooms. It is open for securities and everyone, and most of the times it's not clean enough for the women to use, especially for menstruating women or women when they are pregnant. I've seen cases where pregnant women have informed that they got infections while using toilets in summer, and that's why they avoid using toilets. And to avoid using toilets, they don't stay hydrated, and that's the root cause of most of the problems during summer. And one more thing is rest. Since domestic workers do not have a proper welfare or social protection for them through the government, they do not have a leave policy. So if you notice, out of 24 out of 40 women have asked for leaves, and 27 women that I interviewed did not get leave even on Sundays. They worked all 7 days. And in case of mobility mapping, so apart from just interviewing them, I had also shadowed some of the workers where I followed through them to their work day, understanding how they are commuting and what are the routes that they take. And some of the most noticeable differences is that if you notice in Bangalore, there are areas such as Banshankari, Basavangudi, the southern part of Bangalore, where the green cover is more. But whereas when I was able to shadow workers from Bandepalya, Kudlu, Somasundarapalya near HSR layout, the green cover is comparatively very less. And it's not just about the green cover being less, there's also a lot of pollution in those areas. And most of these women walk to work. And even those who take buses to work, they still walk around 2 to 3 kilometers despite taking buses. And another crucial thing to note here is the time in which they walk. So from 12 to 3 p.m. is somewhere usually the government asks us to stay in the indoors and not go outside. But these women are made to walk around that point of time, either in between shifts or after their work, or some of them sadly start work only after 11:30. And I've had one of the workers tell me that she requested her employer to let her start begin work early, at least just during summer, so that she can cope up with heat, but she was denied because it was inconvenient for them. So these are the basic protections which domestic workers lack. And yes, it comes with a lot of tricky issues because they work under multiple employers. It's not just a single employer that they can rely on, and sadly it comes to the discretion of the employer, which shouldn't be. And yeah, moving on to workload mapping. So if you had noticed, there's already they're already exhausted because of the commute and because of the long walks and during the peak sun hours. Now during the workload is when it gets worse. uh, 15 out of 40 workers have said that they work in kitchens where there are no proper ventilation, or where there is lack of exhaust fans, or and some of the workers even work in terrace. Like now in the in the apartment setup, it's easier to put clothes for dry in the balconies, but for other individual setup houses where they'll have to go to the terrace. And sadly, one of the stories that I heard is that the worker just waters the plant for 2 hours in one of the houses from second floor to the ground floor. And it's the same during summer, and it's especially worse during summer because during rainy season she doesn't have to water the plants. So that's one of the issues. And she also had UTI and other issues because of lack of access to toilets. And I'm just summing up the work conditions. So, and we also had episodes of people blacking out during the work in terrace or in corridors or backyards of traditional houses. So how does working condition affect them? It also affects their productivity. The tasks become slower, and their return journey. People who used to I did two sets of interview, one during early summers, that is before summer hit us, that is January or February beginning, and then I went back to some of the workers during peak March and April months, and the results were drastically different. You could see the stark difference in their results. And those who brag that they walk home very fast and early mention that the walking speed has reduced and it takes 10 to 15 minutes extra to just reach home. And it's not just reaching back to their houses, it's like commuting in between the houses, or the first house that they go to, they're already tired because of the commute. And by the time they come back home, they're exhausted. And like we all know, women do have caregiving responsibility, so they can't rest at home as well. And this is one of the issues that kept repeating with most of the workers. And with regard to expense mapping, when I talk about heat, it affects us in many other ways, and expense and economic burden is something that we cannot ignore. So 10 out of 40 women lost jobs because they couldn't finish doing their task, or they couldn't cope up with the heat and go to n number of houses that they used to go to. So they had to drop out of jobs, or they were fired because their performance was not like it used to be during the summer. And the 30 out of 40 women have mentioned that their household expenses increases from the range of 500 to 3000, which is a huge amount for someone who's doing household labor. And coming to health impacts at last, so this is like the most crucial part of it. And 38 out of 40 workers mentioned that they have more than one health symptom because of heat. Dizziness and headaches were very common, and other most common was kidney infections and UTIs. And sadly, they borne all the medical costs for it. They do not have insurance or the employer supporting them to cover all these medical expenses. And one of the workers even mentioned that she had to pay 40,000 for her kidney infection, due to which she couldn't pay fee for her child's income and child's education, and because of which he had to take a year gap. So the economic burden and the health impact affects in more ways than we could even imagine. It's not just about losing one house, or it's not just about falling sick for a couple of days. And another thing about falling sick is they do not get paid leaves when they fall sick, maximum for 2 days. In her case, because she had kidney infection and she couldn't go for 10 days, she was fired from her work as well. So these are some of our findings that I just wanted to quickly run through. And so coming back to the basics, what do we need to cope up with heat, especially for laborers like them, is just the basic, that is access to drinking water and clean access to toilets and rest breaks and paid leaves. And one more thing is also about the discriminatory practices that are still prevalent. Water being given in disposable cups, and one of the workers told me that she stopped asking for water because when she asked for water, they gave her in this plastic cup, and it was already hot. Standing outside in the courtyard and drinking in a plastic cup was the worst experience. So she stopped asking for water, and she's just working like that. And most of the times when they ask for water, they also been told that why don't you carry your bottle. But like I said, this again comes to employer discretion. There are people who encourage them to use umbrellas or provide them cooling refreshments, but there are also people like this. And 19 people out of 40 people complained about discriminatory practices. So these are all the facts that we have in hand, and we thought, what could we do about it? What do I do with this research? And what could be the possible solutions? And this is still an ongoing research, and these are the first steps that we started taking. First is awareness. And for awareness, we come up with a small charter which can start from an individual level. The employer charter explains about how hydration is important, and it's not just hydration, it's dignified access to water, dignified access to toilets and breaks, and making sure the working condition in the house is better, because it's not just your house, it's also a workplace for someone else when you're employing someone. So these are some of the employee level actions we came up with. Apart from that, we believe it should be in threefold. For domestic workers, conditions to improve, it should also start from domestic workers. It should go to the employers and to the government. So at employer level, one of these were the actions, and at the domestic workers level, we conducted a heat training session for 60 domestic workers, where we brought in a medical practitioner and she helped them understand the consequences of heat related illnesses and what are some things that they could do from their end to cope up with it. And 85% of people who attended said it, they actually learned a lot, and they'll be starting to do something from their end. And one of the, I also have a video, but I can't unfortunately play it, but one of the workers said she's going to go and demand to her employer that I need access to toilet and I need access to water. If not, I'll be having all these issues. If not, I'm leaving the job. So, and she really did that. So yeah, kudos to her. And apart from individual level changes, we also wanted to focus on what are the system level changes that are lacking. So there is Bangalore Apartment Federation, and under Bangalore Apartment Federation, there are multiple apartment associations, also RWAs, more than 1,200 RWAs who are a part, apartment association or RWAs who are a part of BAF, that is Bangalore Apartment Federation. And we developed a heat safety charter along with them. We also have it on our website. I can provide a website link towards the end so that you guys can check it out, because I believe most of us employ someone at home for something. If not a domestic worker inside, this could also extend to the security persons who come in or the drivers that we hire. So this is a poster that these are charters that can be replicable for other kinds of worker and not just domestic workers. So this is one of the first steps that we took towards a systemic change, what apartments can do, how they could have drinking access in common areas and toilet access for for the workers, so that they do not have to ask, because asking is one of the things where they feel very hesitant to ask, and it's a very awkward thing to go and ask for toilets every time. So they want it to be available and not something that needs to be asked. So this is something that we came up with, and later this is still an ongoing thing. So on the parks, Open the Parks campaign. I'm not sure how many of you know about it, but in 2024, there was an order in Bangalore that the park should be open throughout the day, so that it could also be a climate resilient space for people who do not have access to private cooling spaces. And sadly, in 2025 December, it was rolled back just in South Bengaluru Corporation alone. But apart from that, overall in Bangalore, there has been implementation issues, and now we are fighting for the parks to be open. The main aim is to park being accessible for everyone. Park is a public space. When I say public space, it automatically means that it should be an inclusive space. And during the interviews, most women brought in that they do not have resting space even in apartments. So when they wait at the apartment, sometimes in between shifts, they have been chased away saying, "Nim kelsa agidre hogamma, illi ಕೂತ್ಕೋಬೇಡ." There will be unnecessary issues. So do not sit here. If your work is done, just leave, is what they have been told many times. So they were hoping they had a space to sit, but that's when we came up of parks, and they were mentioning most parks are closed in the afternoon hours. In Bangalore, parks are closed from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. That is the peaks and hours. What's the use of having a park? We have a ready-made existing thermal comfort space in Bangalore, and if you're not gonna use it, then it doesn't make sense. So we started this campaign, and we did a we have citizen volunteers in this campaign, and we audited around 17 to 18 parks, out of which around 9 to 10 parks are in South Bengaluru area and rest in all over Bangalore. We've also written a letter to Jayanagar MLA to keep the parks open, and as next steps, we are planning to write a letter to the new CM and the other development minister who's coming in. So this is something that we've started up, and we are looking out for more citizen volunteers as well who are helping us, who are in the same page for this cause. So apart from the parks initiative, we also, in a more systematic level, since the draft bill is here, this is the right time to give recommendations, because once the bill is passed, suggesting for amendments gets a bit difficult, and before enactment is the right phase. And we also have the unorganized sector board in Bangalore who work along with domestic workers issues, and we are bringing this up to them about how heat should be an occupational safety hazard in the bill, and also extend other benefits. So the board is responsible for other schemes and benefits which are available for domestic workers, and we thought bringing in UTIs and kidney related issues as heat related illnesses for which insurance should be there. HeatWatch during the previous study in waste workers also mentioned about insurance to waste pickers during the summer months to cope up with heat related expenses. So this is another thing that we are pushing for. And lastly, sensitizing, awareness and sensitizing are most important. So along awareness, sensitizing and action, all three are important. I don't believe just awareness is important, but yes, from the awareness perspective, there's this smart card scheme and e-Sharam scheme, which is still in process, and there are intermediaries who are helping unorganized workers, especially domestic workers, uh, enroll into it, register into it. And during that time, we were thinking we'll bring in more sensitizing options, or during summers, we can provide heat safety kits like ORS and umbrellas to keep them safe during from the heat. So these are some of the ideas. And yeah, so I just quickly ran through it, and before I finish it, I wanted to, since Geeta Menon is not here, I still want to thank the union for helping me with this research. If not, it wouldn't have been possible to reach out to all the workers in person. But yeah, I'm leaving the floor open for questions or thoughts, if any.
Hi, my name is Akash.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of issues, especially with these gig workers, right? You have the Swiggies and Zomatos. They're doing absolutely nothing for the people who work for them. And you also see for domestic workers, now you have like Pronto and Snabit and all these. Have you looked at how these people take care of the domestic workers who work for them? What are the policies that they have instituted for these people? Or is it the same situation like you have with the Swiggy and Zomato? Because these organizations have become multinational companies. I mean, not MNCs, but their turnovers are big, right? So they become big corporations, and it's difficult to fight them. But the guys who are coming in now with the domestic workers, they are not yet that big. So I think at this level, it's still easy to hold them accountable before they become much bigger than they are now. So do you have anything that you have done with these people or spoken to the domestic workers who are working for these organizations?
Yes, thank you for your question. So, yes, now there is a gig workers law policy in Karnataka which is prevalent, but there's a huge gap over there. There's a huge question which I have also written with regard to the criticism to the domestic workers bill that we have. Like, how do the intermediaries come in? How do these apps come in? And what are the roles that they play? But sadly, in the draft bill, it is very vague. They're not filling all those gaps. But I did try to talk to people who are working through apps, and most of them are migrant workers. And most people that I worked with are from the union. They're not a part of the union, and the union is also trying to get in touch with them. And like you said, when I spoke to a couple of the workers who are with the mobile app, they mentioned that they do not have protection. The app is more pro customer than pro workers, and that is something that we are pushing for. And that's another conversation that we are working on, because we also have a gig workers project that is going. It's not just in Bangalore; it's throughout India. But that is something that we are still. It's a ongoing process. But like you said, it's still a gap. There is nothing which addresses it concretely as of now.
Not being able to use the steel glass and having to use a separate glass and separate washroom or whether it's a basement that comes from the perspective of caste and untouchability, and whether that was explored and it's included in the awareness and in the policies that you're trying to put across, or if it was part of the conversation, because we work with race workers and some of them have shifted to domestic work in terms of their occupations. And in some cases, they were asked for their caste certificate. And so they didn't, they were running behind getting a caste certificate. And it was only when we started talking about it is when it's probably separate them from the work. And so I wanted to know if that was a part of the study and the awareness and the posters that you'll be making for the apartments, or if there is any kind of.
Yeah, our study did have questions with regard to all these discriminatory practices. And like you mentioned, caste, we also had a session where we figured out 75% of people that we interviewed are from the marginalized, the so-called SC, ST caste. And the discrimination is against that people and not just people who are coming from a different caste. Like, this is something that we observed during our research. But with regard to the apartment poster that we are doing right now, it's a first step. And in that, we have subtly mentioned that they need dignified access, because uh, bringing in apartments and talking to them and making it work was not as easy as we thought it would be. And one more thing is, even when I ask, like, I'm just mentioning it here without pulling names, but even when we asked one of the persons while designing the posters, they mentioned that we are worried about the decorum of the space if we are giving them spaces to rest within the apartment community. So that is something that is still explored, but we are thinking of ways. This is an ongoing project, so we are thinking of ways on how to bring that into the bill, and that can be only answered when there is a regulation and when domestic workers are actually recognized as workers through bill. And it needs to happen systematically, because it's a systematical and cultural thing, if I may say, because based on the interviews and based on employer responses, we also had a short employer survey. The younger employers are ready to shift, ready to make changes to make the working conditions better for the workers, whereas we did not see the same kind of response from older employers. So it also shows us a difference between how traditional employers from traditional areas respond and how youth from other areas, such as areas where there are corporations around, where people go to work, corporates, the people who are working in that area, they respond differently.
Thanks for the presentation. A very quick question. Do you foresee a cooperative kind of model among domestic workers to actually hold their rights accountable and to also have the same benefits that they can get in the economic terms?
I do have to acknowledge, I mean, thank you for the question, but I do have to acknowledge that it's going to be a long way, but I think that is how it's supposed to be, more than if I'm foreseeing it or not. And that's what they're fighting for. So they want basic schemes like pension and minimum wages. So they lack all kinds of basic protection and social welfare schemes that are available to workers in general. And they are more vulnerable when it comes to construction workers, who also have a board which is governing them. The effectiveness of the board is a different question, but to answer whether this is something that we are foreseeing, yes, we want it, but it is also a long way to go because we see the struggle of pushing the bill to the domestic workers bill in the cabinet right now. So that's my honest answer.
With the employers that you are talking of. So BAF is one pathway towards more, formalized spaces with apartments and so on. But is there any pathway with more individual, individual houses and those sort of employers? And also if you have a sense of because you're working through the union, but I'm assuming that the domestic work sector is way beyond that. So if you have a sense of how many people actually are able to become part of unions and get any sort of, support and, representation in that manner. So just two thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Sahana. So, with regard to the individual employers, we are still looking out for ways to how to address it to individual households where, especially in traditional Bangalore areas, there are more individual houses than apartments, and we are trying to explore ways on how to reach out to them and what could be the possible solutions that we could propose to them. And with regard to the union, we are sticking to the union because like I mentioned, migrant workers, when we try to approach them, they are very scared to respond to us because the main is fear of loss of jobs because they are worried that if they complain about the issues that they are facing, they might be fired. So through union is how we are trying to bring in more workers. Union is also working towards how to bring in more domestic workers and especially migrant workers who are now working in platform based apps. So yeah, that is something that we are still working. This is still an ongoing project, so I cannot answer that until we actually find more workers. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, first of all. I have I wanted to know more about the methodology part of this research. I mean, I could see it was 40 samples were interviewed. So I am assuming it was a qualitative kind of study you have done. So, or quantitative. I just wanted to need a clarification on that. That was one thing. And any more detail about the profile of these people you have interviewed, the education background or age group or something like that, or like you have mentioned, you have already planned system level and maybe policy level change over the time. So are you planning a more bigger study with more samples involving from different strata of the community? Or yeah, those are my questions.
Sure, I can come in person and because of the paucity of time, I can come in person and explain to you about the research methodology. But with regard to more people, yes, we can. But unfortunately, summer is still seasonal in Bangalore, so maybe we'll be able to do it only during next summer because the responses differ a lot when I did it in January and versus what I did in March and April. So yeah, I think. Yeah, Socrates team, he's here to take the stage. And thank you so much for inviting me and letting me present this. Yes.
And yes, that concludes the event for today. And I just felt like, I have read everything about climate change that was there available in the newspaper and the media. And then you come here and you look at this level of work, you listen to the practitioner and the researcher and see this filmmaker's work, and you wonder there's so much to do, right, by each of us. I hope you also felt the same from this event. So if you did, let's give a round of applause to Sonali, Pritish, and Vaibhavi for the wonderful work they are doing. And may the force be with you, as they say, and carry on this good work. And to keep our energy levels up, we have light refreshments for everybody outside. Please join us there. And last but not the least, again, do follow up our experience center works. Visit all these experience centers that I mentioned whenever you have time and you are in that area. Our social media handle is knowyourcity.blr. So we hope to see you there as well as we hope to see you outside at the refreshment. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I forgot to thank the AV team of the NGMA for the back-end support that they provided us today to keep this event seamless. And thank you so much.